The concept of bringing species back from the dead is not a new one in science. 48 years before Jurassic Park, during World War II, a certain regime in Germany, which I won't name here, wanted to backbreed cattle to bring back the extinct aurochs, to embody their idea of a primeval Germany, a mythic past of ferocious beasts. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, their plans never went ahead, or never succeeded at least. With the publication of Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park, scientific and public interest in bringing back extinct species has spiked. Following several decades of scientific advancements, including in genetic engineering, we're closer than ever to seeing extinct animals walk the planet again. There are many online lists and YouTube videos from years ago claiming that smilodons, short-faced bears, and other Ice Age animals are on that list, when in reality, these animals don't have any high-profile projects for their resurrection. In this video, I'm going to give a complete picture of all species scientists want to resurrect or have tried to resurrect, including how they went extinct, how and why they're being resurrected, and if we should. I have researched for this video a lot, and gone through every official website from companies such as Colossal to create this list. Probably the most iconic animal to go extinct since the last ice age, Mammuthus primigenius, commonly known as the woolly mammoth, has the highest profile initiatives for resurrection of any species, as they lived on the Mammoth Steppe, an incredibly vast steppe tundra that stretched from the Iberian Peninsula in Spain and Portugal to New York, meaning that at their peak, woolly mammoths inhabited an area twice the size of Russia and bigger than all of Asia. Unfortunately, the woolly mammoth began experiencing a population decline at the end of the last glacial maximum, roughly 10,000 years ago. However, small populations on remote islands such as Wrangel Island and St. Paul Island persisted until as recently as 1650 BCE. Yes, that is when the Egyptians were building the pyramids, and that's also when wheels, beer, and glass were around. It's believed mammoths went extinct as a result of multiple factors such as climate change and human hunting. Reviving this Ice Age giant has been a point of discussion for many years. However, in 2021, the American bioengineering company Colossal Biosciences was founded, and their goal was to start resurrecting long-extinct animals, including the woolly mammoth. They plan on comparing the already fully sequenced mammoth genome to an Asian elephant's, their closest relatives. Given they share 99.6% of their DNA, the geneticists plan on editing key genes that trigger a shaggier coat of fur, longer tusks, and smaller ears. The final organism won't be a bona fide woolly mammoth, but rather a proxy organism, a mammothant if you will. It will fill the same ecological niche mammoths filled on the Mammoth Steppe more than 10,000 years ago. Some critics argue that it would be risky using an Asian elephant as a surrogate mother for a proxy, given they're an endangered species. There's also no way of knowing if the animal will have ancient pathogens or be able to survive in today's climate. Supporters argue that the steppe they once roamed has shrunk significantly, and that mammoths being reintroduced could save this valuable ecosystem, given their tendency to trample topsoil. It could even slow the thawing of permafrost, which contains a build-up of greenhouse gases, meaning the woolly mammoth could be a way to combat climate change. The plan is to have a mammoth-like proboscidean in the world by the year 2028. Another animal that has a lot of support behind its de-extinction is the thylacine, colloquially known as the Tasmanian tiger. The thylacine was a carnivorous marsupial closely related to modern-day dunnarts. Until 3,000 years ago, its range spanned across Papua New Guinea, Australia's mainland, and Tasmania. However, competition with dingoes, which arrived roughly 4,000 years ago, led to their extinction on the mainland. When European colonists arrived and brought livestock with them, they blamed the deaths of livestock on thylacine, even though their jaws were likely too weak to deal a damaging bite to a sheep. Nevertheless, the thylacine was hunted and bounties were put on their heads until the last wild individual was shot in 1930. The last captive specimen, a female named Benjamin, died of neglect at the Balmoral Zoo on September 7, 1936, just 2 months after the species was granted protection by the Australian government. In the last 90 years, thousands of eyewitnesses claim to have seen living Tasmanian tigers, and data analytics has been used to guess when they likely went extinct. The best guess is around the 1950s, possibly the 1980s. In far more recent news, Colossal Biosciences has expressed plans to bring back a thylacine-like animal by 2028, using the same process as with the woolly mammoth, comparing the thylacine's DNA to their closest living relative, the fat-tailed dunnart, changing the dunnart's DNA to match the thylacines more closely. This species is a very promising candidate for de-extinction, as they went extinct less than 90 years ago, and there is still plenty of Tasmanian wilderness for them to inhabit. Not to mention, their ecological niche has been left vacant, and wallaby populations in Tasmania have been rising thanks to the absence of their natural predators. The dodo is a very well-known extinct animal, but few people know its true story. In short, it was discovered by the Dutch, who arrived on their island home of Mauritius around the year 1598. It's believed that not only human hunting, but also invasive species such as pigs, rats and macaques led to the extinction of the dodo around the late 17th century. The dodo is known from only a few specimens, including heads, feet and skeletons. In particular, the head and foot at the Natural History Museum of Denmark and specimens from the Oxford University Museum of Natural History are of interest to scientists. Though degraded, these specimens have intact DNA which, through specialised sequencing methods, can be used to map the genome of the extinct bird. It gets complicated when it comes to resurrecting the dodo. Essentially, birds develop differently to mammals in terms of embryonic development, so the scientists resurrecting the dodo have to use different means. They intend on using primordial germ cells of the dodo's closest relative, the Nicobar pigeon, to compare to the dodo's genome so they can edit the pigeon's cells, before injecting the primordial germ cells into a modified chicken embryo so it will develop to resemble a dodo. It's a very long, complicated, drawn-out process, one that will likely take at least a decade. The dodo's home of Mauritius has changed a lot since the 17th century. Pests and invasive species are still common, so we should probably aim on eradicating rats and pigs before we reintroduce dodo proxies. Another de-extinction candidate that will require the use of primordial germ cells for its resurrection is the moa. As recently as the 15th century, New Zealand was home to 9 species of moa, dinornithiforms. The species Colossal appears to want to bring back by my research is the South Island giant moa. The bird lived on New Zealand's South Island and could grow up to 3.6 metres in height. It was hunted by the Maori settlers who arrived in the 1200s, and it only took about 2 to 3 centuries for hunting to bring them to extinction. Bones, eggshells, and some soft tissue samples have intact DNA, so scientists can map the moa's genome. The bird we will get primordial germ cells from would be the tinamou. There are 46 species of tinamou, all endemic to the Americas. They're the only paleognath bird capable of flight. The moa is a curious candidate for de-extinction. It did go extinct more recently than some other candidates, but the main purpose for their resurrection is to revive cultural heritage for the Maori. The passenger pigeon was once the most abundant bird in the world. In the northeastern United States where they lived, they had the largest flock ever recorded, stretching a mile wide and 300 miles long, taking 14 hours to pass overhead, obscuring the sun. Unfortunately, the hunting of passenger pigeons became a very popular sport in the latter half of the 19th century, and their numbers quickly fell. Efforts to revive the passenger pigeon are pretty obscure, with Colossal and other companies mentioning the possibility. The aurochs is the extinct wild ancestor to all domestic cattle. Three species existed: the African, European, and Indian aurochs. The European species was the largest and survived the longest, having gone extinct in 1627. This is when the last individual died in the Jektoro forest in Poland, though there is some evidence to suggest that they went extinct as recently as the 1700s in Bulgaria. Resurrecting the aurochs would require backbreeding instead of genetic engineering. This is where certain traits in cattle breeds are selected, like the shape of the horns, the size, the coloration, etc. The earliest attempt to bring back aurochs was in the Heck cattle project in the 1920s and 30s. It's rather controversial as it was led by the Nazi scientists. Less controversial are more modern projects which aim to genetically and phenotypically select the most similar southern cattle breeds to backbreed a cattle similar to the aurochs, one that will fill the same ecological niche. Another organism that uses backbreeding as part of resurrection projects is the quagga. The quagga was a subspecies of the still living plain zebra that lived on the southern tip of Africa. It was distinguished by its partial striping, which only continued from the shoulders upwards. Towards the animal's hips, the fur became more earthy in colour. It's this hide that made it a prime target for hunters who hunted it for sport and for its unique pelt. The last quagga died in a zoo in Amsterdam in August of 1883 after staying there for 16 years. However, when the animal died, the zoo simply requested for another one to be brought in, but none ever came. In the year 1987, the Quagga Project was an attempt by a group in South Africa to use selective breeding to breed zebras similar to quaggas, having the same patterns as the extinct subspecies. The first foal was born in 1988, and the first foal with reduced striping was born in 2005. As of 2016, 116 animals have been bred across 10 locations close to Cape Town. These aren't quaggas genetically, but this is probably the closest any animal on this list has been to being brought back. Now we move on to animals that have been proposed de-extinction candidates or species that have been mentioned on Colossal's official website. Species Colossal has sequenced the DNA from include the following: bluebucks, longhorned bison, Columbian mammoths, direwolves, giant sloths, great auks, megaloceros, cave hyenas, moas, saber-toothed cats, woolly rhinoceros, mastodons, tooth-billed pigeons, American cheetahs, giant short-faced bears, and Stella's sea cow. These animals have only been mentioned by Colossal as having their DNA sequenced and studied. They never said outright they planned on bringing any of these species back. However, I will just assume that they have plans, even if they're for the far future, like 2050 kind of far. Before I end the video, I'll leave you with my take on de-extinction, as it's double-sided. First, I believe it is not only our right, but our responsibility to undo the damage we have caused, to give animals we drove to extinction a second chance. Species like the dodo, thylacine, passenger pigeon, moa, and quagga would still exist today if it weren't for human hunting and habitat destruction. Nature didn't select these species for extinction, we did. Secondly, the number of species on the list I've compiled is far, far less than the number of species that go extinct every day. Every day, over 100 species are estimated to go extinct. Bringing back a small selective group of extinct animals won't make up for what we've lost. Let's give animals we wiped out a second chance while also decreasing the rate of extinction back to natural levels, and we will find ourselves in a world where de-extinction is never needed.